Most guitarists spend years trying to master the fretboard, but you can fast-track that process with the right approach. I've put together a 5-part series packed with exercises, tabs and worksheets to help you develop a deep pro-level fretboard understanding. But here's the thing, this isn't a quick fix, it's a long-term process, and the real challenge is knowing how to stick with it without getting overwhelmed and quit. So, in this video, I'll share the key principles that will make this process 10 times easier. But I won't be walking you through the exercises, that's all covered in this series. Instead, I'll show you how to build a practice plan that actually works for you. And if you need even more details, I've put together a free ebook with extra tabs and worksheets and explanations. So definitely check this out if you take this serious. The link is in the description. Okay, let's get into it. First, let's be real. Learning the fretboard is a made-up term. It doesn't mean anything on its own. So let me define what I mean when I talk about building a strong fretboard understanding. Well, to me, a strong fretboard understanding means grasping how the guitar translates the basic principles of music, specifically how it translates pitch. The good news, we don't need to reinvent the wheel, chase shortcuts, or look for so-called secrets to understanding the fretboard like a professional. We just need to learn and apply the fundamentals, the things that actually matter. Then everything else builds from there. And here's the even better news. There aren't that many fundamentals. You only need to grasp 4 core concepts. So that's great. But good news often comes with bad news. So here's the catch. The guitar makes grasping these fundamentals harder than it really is. It's actually a rather complicated instrument when it comes to understanding the basics. So that's why so many players spend decades before they fully get it. The other problem, well, these fundamentals have to be learned in a specific sequence because they build on each other. If you learn them in the right order, you'll avoid a lot of confusion. So that's exactly what makes this program different. So most guitarists learn bits and pieces at random. A little of this, a little of that, and after years or maybe even decades, things start finally making sense. Well, and that's fine. That's the path most players take. Well, that's how I learned too. And honestly, it was a grind because looking back, I wished I'd taken a more organized path. Something like the system I'm about to show you here. So let's first get a big picture overview of the 4 core concepts and why the order you learn them in makes all the difference. This should be obvious, but before we talk about anything, scales, chords, whatever, we have to know the note names. If you can't name a note or locate it on the fretboard, well, then you don't have a foundation. Everything else depends on this, so make sure you actually learn the notes on the fretboard, because without this you won't be able to apply any of the other concepts effectively. Once you know the notes, the next logical step is intervals. But why are they important? Well, intervals are simply a way to measure the distance between 2 notes. They describe how notes relate to each other, and we use them to define everything in music theory. Scales, chords, melodies, harmonies, everything. So think of intervals like units of measurements, like liters, ounces, meters, inches, whatever. So no matter what concept you are learning in music theory, intervals are the unit we use to describe it. The third concept to learn is scales, specifically the major scale. It's the foundation of our entire music theory system. Everything else builds from it. To be fair, at this step you could learn Triad first instead. If you already know the note names and intervals, you can go either way. So here's the key difference. Scales organize notes in a sequence, one after another, while triads group 3 notes that are played at the same time. So it's up to you which concept you want to learn next, but I recommend starting with scales because they're a little easier to grasp than triads. So I suggest learning triads last because they're a bit more challenging. But if you've already built a solid foundation with the first 3 concepts, this will be easy. I'll teach you a system to organize every triad on the fretboard, so once you know them, you'll never struggle with chords and harmony again. And here's the best part. Triads aren't just for chords, they are hugely beneficial for lead guitar playing too. So let's sum it up. You first need to learn the note names, so you actually know what you're talking about and have a good orientation of the fretboard. Second, you need intervals so you understand the most fundamental unit of measurement in music theory. With these 2 concepts alone, you can learn anything related to music theory, and vice versa. If you don't know both or have major gaps, you'll likely feel confused and overwhelmed by music theory. At its core, and speaking very broadly, music theory is built on just 2 fundamental concepts: melody and harmony. And that's why you should move on to learning scales next, to cover the topic of melody, because scales organize notes that are played one after another. And then lastly, you should cover harmony by learning triads. Since triads are 3 notes played together, they form the foundation of chords. So that's the whole structure of music theory fundamentals. Learn them in order and everything else will start making sense. So, how do you actually stick with such an extensive program? First, let's zoom out and look at the big picture. This is a long-term goal, so give yourself plenty of time. Commit to learning all 5 parts and actually doing the exercises. That's the most important thing. And don't stress over the details too soon, because just keep the big picture in mind. And since this is a long-term goal, let me be clear. It's not a one-time thing, it's a cycling process. Once you go through the exercises and all 5 parts, you'll come back to them with a fresh perspective on your second pass. So that's the process. And with that in mind, don't get stuck too long on one part or one exercise. Don't let perfectionism or procrastination slow you down. You have full permission to do everything in this program imperfectly. In fact, that's necessary because you'll refine things later in your second or maybe third pass. But for now, just go through all 5 parts. And since we are aiming to complete this within a year, I suggest you don't spend more than 3 to 4 months on any one part. That gives you plenty of room for missed practice sessions and even breaks where you don't touch the guitar. But always keep the big picture in mind. You need to complete all 5 parts for this to work. Now that we have zoomed out, let's zoom in and get into the details. The big question is, how should you structure your practice sessions so you can actually stick to this plan without losing focus? Well, the biggest danger with a long-term goal like this is treating it like a rigid practice routine. Well, something you have to stick to even if it makes you miserable. I don't want you to end up hating your instrument, so you need a healthy balance between structured exercises and making real music. I suggest you spend 70% of your time on real music, learning songs, jamming, improvising, coming up with your own licks and riffs. The remaining 30% should be on structured exercises like the ones in this program. This does 2 things. First, it prevents burnout. You don't get bored or frustrated by rigid practice routines. And second, it helps you learn slowly, which is actually a good thing. The famous violinist Itzhak Perlman once said, "If you learn fast, you forget fast. If you learn slow, you forget slow." And he's right. When you take your time and let things sink in over a long period, they actually stick with you. So don't try to rush through all 5 parts in just 2 or 3 months. On the other hand, the 70-30 rule also takes care of another important principle. You have to practice things directly. If your goal is to become a good musician and make music, then you need to actually play music. Exercises are useful, but if you spend most of your time on exercises, you'll get really good at playing exercises, not at making music. So, in other words, exercises and programs like this are supplements, so please never spend the majority of your practice time on them alone. They support your musicality, but they can't replace actually making music. Alright, the next thing I want to talk about is the difference between learning something and practicing it. This is super important, especially if you don't have much practice time. Learning and practicing feel different, but you can't skip the learning phase. It's simple. Before you can practice something, you have to learn it first. You need to know how it works and where to put your fingers on the fretboard first. And if you're short on time, it's totally fine to spend an entire session just on figuring out how an exercise works. It might not feel productive or satisfying, but well, it's part of the process. Learn and understand the exercise first, then practice it. Next time you pick up your guitar, you'll already know what to do. Practice is the doing, the playing, the repetition. So always remember, first learn the concept, then practice it. Once you understand how an exercise works, the next step is simple. Break it down into small, manageable pieces, then repeat them. First, reduce it. Don't try to take on too much at once. Shrink it down into bite-sized chunks. Get an overview of the exercise and decide how big of a chunk you can handle without feeling overwhelmed. I can't stress this enough. Make it ridiculously easy, almost insultingly so. That's when you're doing it right. For example, if you're working on part 1 of this series and learning the note names, well, just focus on one string at a time. And if that still feels like too much, well, cut it down even further. Work on just half the string or only up to the 5th fret. Once you've got that down, start repeating. And here's the rule. The more, the better. If you've played something hundreds of times, you'll be good at it. It's that simple. But here's the catch. Don't do it mindlessly. It's way better to do fewer mindful repetitions than to play for 3 hours while half watching TV. Now, let's quickly talk about chunking, because this is one of the best ways to tackle big complex projects like songs, exercises, or difficult passages. Instead of trying to learn everything at once, break it down into smaller parts. Practice them separately, then start combining them into bigger sections. For example, if you're working on a challenging solo, don't try to play the whole thing from start to end. Instead, learn small phrases one by one. Connect 2 small phrases into a bigger section. Slowly build it up until the full solo comes together. This method works incredibly well. It actually gets you faster results. If you try to tackle something too big all at once, it'll take way longer to learn it in the end. So, do yourself a favor, take a few minutes up front to chunk things down and then piece them together. That's almost always the fastest way to learn something on your instrument. You have to track your practice sessions. It's the best way to see real improvement and objectively assess your efforts. The good news, you only need to track 2 things. That's it. First, count your practice sessions. Simple, right? Over time, this gives you a clear big picture overview. After a year, you should be able to look back and say, wow, I have practiced 220 times this year. And let's be real, we can barely remember what we had for breakfast. So there's no real way we'll remember exactly how often we practice over a year. And if you're just guessing, well, you'll probably overestimate how much you've practiced. But when you check your log and see you only practice 15 times in a year, well, no wonder you didn't improve. Alright, here's the second thing you have to track. Repetitions within a practice session. Let's say you're working on the note name exercise from part 1. Just track how many times you've played each chunk in a session. If you've practiced 3 or 4 different chunks, write it down. Why? Because over time you'll start seeing patterns. You'll know exactly how many reps it takes before an exercise starts feeling easy. That kind of data is gold. It gives you a realistic idea of how long you actually need to learn something and not just how long you think it should take. I recommend keeping it super simple. Just use a tally chart. Track 2 things: practice sessions per year and repetitions per session. If you want to go deeper, you can also write down things like light bulb moments, struggles, or anything else that might be worth noting. Looking back at this after a year can be eye-opening and really rewarding. Now it's your turn. Create a realistic practice plan. And I really want to emphasize the word realistic here. What's realistic? Well, that depends on you. Some people thrive with very structured plans, sticking to them like clockwork, while others are more chaotic and don't do well with strict schedules. Both are fine. But no matter where you fall on that spectrum, there are a few key things to keep in mind. Keep it simple. It's better to have a basic, easy to follow plan than some ultra detailed one that falls apart after a week. It doesn't need to be fancy, just something you've thought through. Expect your first plan to be imperfect, and that's okay, because crafting a plan is a skill. You'll get better at it over time. Your situation is unique, so only you can design a plan that really works for you. Be your own teacher. You need to figure out how you learn best. The truth is, most of us already know what we should do, but we just don't always do it. That's what makes us human, right? But putting together a plan increases the odds that you'll stick to it. Adapt and tweak as you go. Your practice sessions will tell you exactly what's working and what's not. So don't be afraid to adjust your plan if something clearly isn't effective. That said, don't abandon things too soon. Some exercises take time before they click, and often the stuff that seems boring or frustrating at first becomes enjoyable once you get good at it. And tracking your practice helps here too, because it lets you reflect, make better decisions, and ultimately teach yourself how to improve. And finally, don't lose sight of joy. Your excitement and enjoyment of playing are precious resources, so protect them. If your practice plan starts sucking the fun out of playing, do something about it. Skipping a session, well, that's okay. Taking breaks, also okay. Sometimes you need to push yourself to practice, but if you're constantly forcing it and losing joy, well, that's a problem. If you have to choose between sticking rigidly to a practice plan but feeling burnt out, or playing for fun and keeping that spark alive, choose joy. Because once you start losing that excitement, you'll probably hit a plateau, or worse, stop playing altogether for long stretches of time. So it's better to miss one session and come back with fresh energy than to grind through uninspired practice and start resenting your guitar. The goal is to keep coming back, hungry to play. Okay, if you're ready to take this journey and really dive into the details, check out the free ebook linked below, where you'll find additional exercises and tabs, and I love to hear your progress. So leave a comment about your biggest struggle with the fretboard and let me know if you have any questions. Remember, this isn't a race. Learning the fretboard is a journey, so stay patient, keep applying these principles, and soon enough you'll have the entire fretboard at your fingertips. So have fun and stay tuned.